Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every week to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace, and its absence, playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. Glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
Hi, you two. I'm so happy to see you. We were talking before we got on as what's a kosher greeting for two friends in a public setting, and I went with you two. Hi, you two. Yeah,
we're going for objective mathematical reality. That's what we're. Yeah, I mean, that's what it's come to.
That's true. Yes.
Well, okay. Well, you two then. What do you got to say for yourselves this beautiful Thursday?
You know, it's a lot. Pioneer Day is tomorrow in fourth grade.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's top of my mind too. I'm glad you brought that up.
It's been a whole thing this morning to try to think about, like, can I send in a glass bottle of root beer? You know, like, what does he wear? Yeah, it's, you know, that's actually what's on the front of my brain right now is Pioneer Day for the fourth grade.
Well, what did he go with in terms of, did you have any, like, sort of like chaps or something? Like, what do you wear?
We have none of those things.
Right.
Yeah, there's always like the broad assumption made in Texas that everyone has cowboy boots. That's not true anymore. So
I totally thought that when I moved to Houston, I was like, everyone was gonna have cowboy boots, a southern accent, wear a 10-gallon hat, and maybe like half the people will ride their horses to work.
Right.
I think I actually thought that. And then I got there and I was like, I am the most provincial person who has ever lived.
Well, every time I've been to Texas, the only thing I do notice is that the cars are discernibly larger. Like you pull up next to some cars that you're like, how big? I had no idea they made a pickup this size.
Yes.
Conversely, when I took a bunch of kids from Texas on a youth trip to San Francisco, they were like, everyone here drives a hybrid. There's no pickups. And you can't get bacon on your burger at In-N-Out, which they found to be deeply distressing. So, yes.
Cultural difference. We're learning it. We're becoming more and more aware, attuned, sensitive.
Yes.
Any news to report on your end there, Heyman?
Well, I'm a priest in the Episcopal Church, so I'm, Holy Week is next week, so I'm kind of freaking out about that a little bit. We're doing Palm Sunday, we got the Passion reading, we're live streaming, we're under a tent, so it's going to be a Holy Week like none other. So that's definitely top of mind right now. I'll confess to a little bit of anxiety. One of our blessed retired priests called me yesterday. He's older, to let me know he'd be there on Palm Sunday, which I'm excited about because I love him. But he did say, he's like, RJ, Palm Sunday, kind of a big deal. I was like, really? Oh, okay, thanks for reminding me. I appreciate the encouragement.
It's on the big stage now.
Oh, that's right. Don't blow it, baby.
There's so many times in my life when people are like, when are you going to run a church? Like, when are you going to be rector?
No, hold out as long as you possibly can.
Like, it's time for you. And I'm
Don't do it.
Look, I've seen this up close. So,
That's right.
I don't know.
Sarah, how are Holy Week preparations going in your sphere at Holy Spirit or Rice?
Well, Holy Spirit, it's everything RJ just said. So, I'm not doing any
Controlled
of it.
chaos.
I watched my husband, every morning, he, is leaving as early as possible to try to get stuff together and then coming home very late at night. That's what I know is happening for Holy Week. And it's just, it'll be a sweet week with my students. So, I think we'll probably, I'm hoping we can do something really fun for Easter, like maybe a dinner together outside. And then this is amazing news. Because pretty much all of them have been vaccinated, I think we're actually going to be able to do a retreat together before the semester's out, go away somewhere, which is so awesome. Because these kids have RJ, you've got a son in college. It's just been a hellacious year. Yeah. So, and I think about my kids who are seniors this year and what that's been, it's just brutal. So that actually, on a serious note, is such a bright spot in my ministry right now.
Good.
That's so cool. I mean, there are rumblings. There are rumblings of the fact that our bishop may allow us
Rumors of grace
to meet at some point in the future indoors. But I'm jealous, RJ. I wish I was in West Palm Beach and I could come to your church. We're doing some outdoor stuff here, which I'm.
It's going to be awesome.
Excited about.
Lent in a tent, has got to say, has been amazing. The turnout's been incredible. People brought their
I love
dogs,
the
their
rhyme,
coffees.
RJ.
Lent in a tent.
Someone
said Richard Ranger. Is that his name? I think he was a big time mock. He's like, you need to trademark that. I was like, do you know anybody? You know a lawyer that can help?
Lent in a tent.
Yeah, but the butterflies have been buzzing. We've seen so many new people, and it's been great. It's been really fun. So
I mean, you could
sort of be thankful for.
You could sell like an enormous tent with some prayer books and like maybe. I don't know. What would some more Episcopal things be?
I don't know, but people have
don't
sold
go into marketing,
dumber
Dave. Stay in your lane.
things.
Stay in your lane.
Some like bad coffee, and you could call it Lent in a tent.
100%.
And just mark it up. See, this is
Ashes.
why. This is why I run the
Fish.
organization. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm the big thing that I'm sort of reeling from right now is I guess we do make television recommendations sometimes, but I've just finished this. The new season, the basketball season of Last Chance U on Netflix.
We started it last night, Dave.
I got 3 episodes in. I went to bed too late.
It is.
Dave.
It's unbelievable.
It's so good.
I told someone it's like a real life Friday Night Lights, but like more Christian and and basically all black. And it's just like the premise of the show is that it's a lot of junior college athletes, and they're guys that are incredible athletes. East Los Angeles. Incredible athletes, but they've either gotten in trouble with the law or they failed out of everywhere, and this is their last chance, and the coach is very cognizant of the fact that their window is closing, and this is basketball for all of these guys is their sort of way out or way to a better life. And you listen to their stories, and everyone's been through hell, and all the coaches, it's been their way out of like really bad environments. But the grace, I mean, there's one point where the coach says, I realize that these guys need love the most when they deserve it the least.
Yes.
And some folks see a thug coming in with a hoodie and, earphones on and a scowl on his face. And,
What you don't know is that his mom died of cancer and his father's in jail,
But he also says, I want to see them how God sees them, because that's how, as there's a gem in there. And you just watch this like real life, actual, the heroes of the world are making $15,000 at community colleges and loving some guys that are giving them a really hard time. And for no other reason than this guy he says, I just feel called by God to do this.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The thing that struck me about it, and we all know I'm not sportsy, the thing that struck me about it is that he literally like trains them to leave. Like, it reminded me in some ways of parenting, like that we do this thing with all our hearts, right? We love them in such intentional ways, God willing, to leave. And that's what he's essentially doing. Like, he's not going to have these guys forever on his basketball team, So it's just, it's such a, it's just all gifts of grace. It's a fabulous show.
Well, he's honest about wanting to win. He's very competitive. He wants to win.
Yeah.
But maybe even more than that, he wants them to go and get a scholarship at a Division I school and have an actual future,
And those two things are so related,
They are.
So it's just it's so good.
I'm going to write about it this week because one of the things he very much sees himself as sort of a father figure but a disciplinarian too. He yells at them constantly, but without using curse words, and he uses all these funny made up words that they make fun of him for, because the other guys, they're just, anything comes out of their mouth they want to say. Firecracker, you mugs are going to do this. And he basically realizes that what he's conveying to these young men, although it sounds like the law and it sounds like you must win and all this stuff, what it conveys to them is that he cares and that he's committed to them. And for these guys who've never really had it, like one of the guys says early on, who gives him so much grief, the guy says, I know that there are 2 people praying for me in my life, and it's my grandmother and Coach Mosley, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's what they know. And, to be honest with you, I was so impressed by it. I reached out to the guy on Instagram, and he has agreed to do a live interview at our Tyler event over Zoom. So I'm pumped.
Great, Dave.
And you know what? I asked him. I said, I was so encouraged by this as a person trying to do ministry and watching grace in action. And his response was like, David, I'd love to do it. To God be the glory.
Oh my gosh,
Amazing.
That's amazing. What a blessing that will be for us.
I can't wait. But let's move from there into, we got a bunch of things to talk about today. The first is Sherry Turkle. Sherry Turkle is an MIT professor who writes about on-screen sort of screen technology and robotics. But she wrote a book called Alone Together that we quoted on the Mockingbird website quite a bit, and she's written a book about reclaiming conversation. She's a well-known academic. And Corinne Pertil in The New Yorker decided to profile her and ask her how and figure out how her pandemic year was going, a year where we're all been so confined to virtual communication. And so I'll read you a little bit of it. In Alone Together, Turkle observed that insecure in our relationships and anxious about intimacy, we look to technology for ways to be in relationships and protect ourselves from them at the same time. When relationships are maintained through these technological channels, we share not ourselves, but the story we want people to see. You don't have to be an attention-hungry media influencer for this to be true. You just have to be someone who prefers to control how people see you, who fears the exposure of your flaws or frailties. You have more efficiency because you have less vulnerability, Turkle writes, of screen-based interaction. The more we present our streamlined selves, the less likely we are to experience the reassurance of true intimacy, of knowing that our flaws have been seen and accepted anyway. She continued, talking to the New Yorker profiler, we are much less likely in this Zoom encounter that they're having at the moment, trust me, to have a quarrel. I know this from research, because the little things that happen that would cause a quarrel don't. The little rough around the edges things, you're doing little things that will annoy me, my doing little things that will annoy you, are not going to happen here. You'll leave and I'll leave before we even get started on those. Then the Corinne Pertil writes, during our Zoom calls, I closed every other program on my laptop and placed my phone in a different room so that she wouldn't notice my eyes flick, even momentarily, to a notification. Talking to someone whose life work is conversation can be stressful. This year has offered a stark and painful lesson about social deprivation. After a year away from people who don't live in my house, I'm finding it harder to respond to the increasingly rare texts from loved ones asking how I am, and I notice that the texts I send asking that question often go unanswered. Too much is built up to compress into a text. What I want more than anything is simply to be in the presence of the people I love and miss the most, to see how they hold themselves now and what their faces look like when they tell me, with words or tears or silence, what this last year has been like for them. I want them to do the same for me. I want more than it can be communicated through a device. And yet Turkle admits herself that she's, really loved watching like Patrick Stewart read Shakespeare on Zoom and Yo-Yo Ma do cello recitals. She says the pandemic had pushed us to make our mediated communications a little less efficient and a little more human. It reminded us all, she said, that when we have the time and the imagination and the need, we can make something of this thing. The three of us we're talking through a Zoom-like technology now, and lots of our lives and social lives and ministries. And, Sarah, I can't help but think of you, that the absolute blessing it was to have a service for your parents that was in person, a funeral service. And yet I have attended some virtual funerals, and they are very, again, they're better than nothing. And they can be very powerful in certain ways, but you miss so much. And I guess it's almost cliched to complain about it, but I love how Turkle explains that we're not going to get into a fight on Zoom, but for the same reasons that we won't also feel like we've really been with each other or feel loved. What stuck out to you?
I mean, I don't know. I was thinking my dad has this old friend. His name is Dudley Dabbs. That's his real name. So growing up my whole life, it was like, Dudley's on the phone. And he insisted that he had to have a conversation with me yesterday morning. And he's in North Carolina. So we were like this, talking over the computer screen. And he told me this wonderful story about my father. And you can totally cut this, but it was this funny story about Dudley's father had a guy that worked for him in, I think, rural Mississippi or somewhere on the coast. And the guy had never seen the ocean, and they were close to the ocean. And Dudley's father took him down there, and he said, "We're going to see the ocean." And the guy was very quiet as they stood in front of the ocean. And Dudley's dad looked at him and said, "What do you think?" And he said, "It's not as big as I thought it would be."
What?
And when my dad came to visit us in New York the first time, we walked into Grand Central Station, and out of nowhere, seemingly, my father looked up and said, "It's not as big as I thought it would be." And I thought, what an asshole. And he called his friend Dudley and said, "Hey, I used that on Sarah." And Dudley was like mortified. And he's like, "I'm going to call her. I'm going to tell her it's an old joke and an old story." And my dad said, "No, don't do that. She'll be mad at both of us then." And he said, "Someday I'll tell her." Well, he, of course, didn't. And so it was like imperative on Dudley's heart. And it was such a beautiful gift to me. I mean, both because I will never hear my father's stories again, and he had such beautiful ones. And because Dudley has aged and he sort of resembled my father. And for me, it's hard for me, I think, in the season I'm in where technology has been such a blessing. It's hard for me to think of it. It's also been really imperfect, right? Because there's no way for me to be perfect right now. Like, I can't actually, like, curate. I can't curate, like, a production around my parents' deaths. I'm good, but I'm not that good. And so it's all been really messy in terms of technological communications, and I've been so thankful for it. So I don't know that responds well to what she said, but I just, that's a thing that, like, that was such a huge unexpected blessing, you know?
Made me think of a few things. I mean, one is, and I know this is going to be a common story for a lot of people around the country, but a member of our church passed away of COVID about 10 days ago. And it was a bit of a roller coaster because he got it and it was really bad, and then it was better, and then it was worse, and then he died. But the tough thing was that his wife, his amazing wife of more than 50 years, didn't see him for like the last month of his life, because even when, he was continually testing positive for COVID. So he was in the hospital, then he improved, then he went to a nursing home, then he went back to the hospital. And the best she could do was kind of a FaceTime where she talked to him, and the nurse assured her that hearing was the last thing to go, and that her husband heard her as he sort of slipped from this life to the next. But just how unbelievably awful that is. And it calls to mind, Nathan Hart speaking to us about a year ago and saying, here's what's happening in New York City, even though it's not happening in Virginia or Texas quite yet. So I thought about that and just the horror of what this last year has been for so many people. And then personally, I just found it convicting thinking about kind of the hierarchy of intimacy when it comes to interpersonal relationships. There's the face-to-face interaction where you're with someone, and not the cursory, but that where you're in their home and you're sitting down and you're spending time and you're getting to know somebody. And then there's Zoom, which is like slightly worse. Then there's the phone call, which is slightly worse. And there's email, which is slightly worse. And there's text, which is the worst. And which is the one I prefer, probably?
Yeah.
She says text, because my life is too much about efficiency and getting things done, and not about relationship. And if I'm to be really honest, some of that is also fear. Fear of really being known. And some is maybe a little bit of wisdom. One of the challenges, I think, of pastoral ministry is sharing enough of yourself to be a human being who's a beggar telling other beggars where he found bread, but not such a human being that your parishioners are like, whoa, this guy's a nut job. Like showing them enough of the crazy, but not too much of the crazy, and kind of maintaining what someone once called the personal professional boundary, which sounds not very healthy. But it's really challenging to navigate all of that. And also keeping in mind what Paul says, we do not preach ourselves, we preach Christ crucified, for your sake and for us, and keeping the focus on Jesus and not making it about me and taking things so personally. But it is a real challenge, finding true intimacy, especially in this time, but also in our hyper efficiency focused world and being a hyper efficiency focused person. And as she just wrote about her relationships to her doctoral mentees and other people, and taking walks on the beach and noticing things in people's homes and really being present in the moment as she was interacting with other people, I found that convicting, because I struggle to do that. I struggle to be really present. And it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
I do kind of romanticize, like, what was pastoral ministry like before telephones and email, and where, like, if you wanted to see somebody, you had to go knock on their door.
Definitely better.
A lot of travel time.
Right? I think it was.
I think it was better.
Yeah, but I also think, it probably was.
People took naps, RJ. That's all I ever hear about. When I hear these old clergy talking, there was like, I took a nap every day at 2 p.m. I'm like, what?
Dave, your dad used to take a nap in his office at seminary every so often. I think he would tell his secretary, hold my calls for half an hour. I'll be napping.
He's been doing that my whole life. It's easier when you wake up at like 5 o'clock every morning. But this trade-off that she mentions a number of times that you've just hit on, the trade-off between efficiency and intimacy, I've never heard it put quite that way. And that, we can either have efficiency or we can have intimacy, but you can't quite have both.
You cannot.
No, you can't. No.
And everything tells you can, right? That's like a solid 32% of Instagram is like for mothers, is like, you can be super efficient and you can have intimacy with your children and you can have intimacy with your husband. And it makes me think of like the early days of the pandemic. Because, like, I was totally in a pattern of when I would read to the kids at night, I was like, it's like you're, like, trying to get them to, like, round second base and T-ball. You're like, hustle. Okay. You know what I mean? Like, you're just like...
Who says you're not sporty, Sarah
Right?
Condon?
I'm super sporty. But...
Get the windmill arm going. Yep.
But then when the pandemic happened, I was like, I remember trying to, like, hustle our daughter along to bed. And I was like... Why? You know what I mean? Like, what am I going to go do? And there was like a moment of like real connection and sweetness in that. And like me not being like an anxious presence in that I was like, oh, like this is more pleasant. You know what I mean? Like, this is more enjoyable for both of us. So.
Well, I was just going to say about this show that I just watched, and this guy, Coach John Mosley, and he's in these players' lives because they spend so much time together in person. Yeah. And spoiler alert, at the end of it, you sort of see what's It's not a real spoiler. You see what's happening during COVID. And you watch as he's, it fast forwards a few months.
I wondered about that.
And like you realize, you watch him try to get on Zoom and it's not quite working. And you just realize, oh my gosh, this guy's ministry they'll figure out something. But it's not going to work quite as well if he can't have these...
It's an actual ministry of presence.
Yes.
As opposed to, people talk about the ministry of presence, it actually is that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I thought there was something sad about it. But then again, what Sherry Turkle says is in the ways that we have pushed these technologies to be a little less efficient, a little more humane. When you hear about people, having like happy hours on Zoom, at first it sounded so ridiculous because it seems like it contradicts the very nature of the medium, which is to communicate information quickly. And to just sit there and hang out, you have to get over some dissonance on that. But but people doing live Instagram, I think sometimes I remember watching a performance by a friend of mine, and I felt like, gosh, I feel like I'm in his living room. This is pretty cool. And this wouldn't have happened without this. And so maybe it has been a little bit of a slight pushing of the needle towards something, because I think about this efficiency thing, and I've been reading this book by a French Christian anarchist thinker Jacques Ellul, who calls our society a technological
name dropper.
He talks about technology, that we're obsessed with techniques, getting things more and more efficient, and for no other reason than they need to be more efficient. And things will all go more efficiently, and the trade-off is less human connection. And
Yes.
it's a lot of means without an end, and the means will constantly be getting faster and better. And somehow the pandemic feels like maybe we could say that there's been a slight, spanner thrown in the works. But RJ, you were trying to say something.
Well, two things. I mean, my 4-year-old FaceTimes our college freshmen, and they just hang out over FaceTime. Like they just hang out. My older son's doing his homework. My youngest son is eating a bowl of cereal, and they'll just hang out, which is kind of hilarious. But no, Sarah, I totally related to what you said about not getting as efficient with your kids. We just had spring break, and it was just so great because we let Marshall stay up as long as we wanted to. So he would fall asleep at about 10 o'clock at night, and then he would sleep till 8:30 in the morning, which was
so nice.
Unbelievable. And then school starts again. I'm like, why can't school start at 9?
Yeah.
Why does school have to start at 7:30 or 8? Because just getting that extra hour and a half of sleep was just bliss, and made me like him more.
Yeah.
And
I hear
That's
that.
all it takes.
less conflict.
Well, let's move on to something that was another fascinating article, this time in Vice by Shayla Love, who is usually, I think she sort of writes about human behavior for them. And the title is Why Your True Self is an Illusion. And she asks at the beginning, if you went into another body, which of your traits would most likely come with you? Above other personality quirks, memories, and preferences, people consistently answer that question saying that they would retain traits related to their morality.
What?
Yeah. The true self is what people believe is their essence. It's the core of what makes you you. If it was taken away, you would no longer be you anymore. Remarkably, not only do most people believe in a true self, they consistently say that their true self is the parts of them that are fundamentally morally good. Though this finding has been repeated many, many times, what we know from neuroscience and psychology doesn't provide evidence for a separate and persisting morally good true self buried within. Yet that makes the true self and the fact that so many of us have belief in this all the more intriguing. She writes, when people make positive changes in their life, they are more likely to be viewed as revealing what was always deep inside of them. When they make negative changes, they are moving away from their true selves.
This is so good.
When subjects were asked what parts of the self were to blame for a person becoming, quote, bad, like being a deadbeat dad, as one study asked, participants said that those changes were attributable to the surface self. But if someone becomes a better person, a loving father, well, that was an expression of the true self. This conception of a morally good true self is stable in ways that other psychological constructs aren't. Studies with people from Colombia, Singapore, and Russia all had similar findings, even though those cultures have very different ideas about the self and the nature of the individual. Yet, our modern world can seem to offer a contradiction to the belief in the morally good true self. If we believe that about ourselves and others, why is there so much political strife, hate crimes, and nasty bickering online? Even when we strongly disagree with someone, it doesn't necessarily conflict with the belief in the true self, since the true self is not married to a person's actions. When you have close friends or family with a very different worldview, there's a knee-jerk reaction to feel like, well, that's not really them. They got sucked into this thing on Facebook, or they've been duped. But I know that below that is who they really are, which is how I see the world. Meanwhile, the other person is having the same thoughts, that you've been indoctrinated, and deep down you hold the same values that they do. It seems to be such a widespread cognitive tendency that it would be difficult to dissuade people from it. Also, telling people they're not actually morally good won't entice a very captive audience. More pressure to
As we well know.
More pressure.
I better find a new line of work.
More pressure to, quote, be yourself or find yourself can add to the stress of being alive.
I mean, just to be clear, everyone's true self is 100% the same. Okay? 100% the same. And we're all like selfish assholes, sinners. Like that is your true self. I just like when it all falls apart, it's the same like
Oh, you're so negative, Sarah.
weird,
What a Debbie Downer.
like Spanish horror movie, like monster inside is like what your true self is. Like, just to be clear.
What about the Imago Dei, Sarah? What do you say?
Yes,
What do you say to that?
yes, the image of God.
You
We're all
know,
created-
it's so interesting to hear this because we this past Sunday when I was preaching to the students, I talked a little bit about incarnational theology, and I totally got this from Same Old Song from our lectionary podcast with Aaron Zimmerman and Jacob Smith, and it's just so excellent. But they talked about when we talk about incarnational theology, it's we so often want to think of it as us becoming like God, but it's really that God became us. And when you think about who we are at our base level, at our truest selves, I've said this a million times before, but it's like when I was in seminary and people would talk about the Holocaust or civil rights movement, and they're like, oh man, when that happens, I'm going to be out there on the front lines, like I'm going to do. And I'm like, girl, you going to hide in your house and you know it, like I want to hear that. It is so remarkable. Remarkable is not even the word. It is insane that God looked at us and was like, I'm gonna become one of them. You know what I mean? Like, it's insane. So it's like crazy. We get so used to Christmas and Easter, we don't think about like how insane it is. So anyway, it's so, I hate to say this, but it's so validating, probably which is just it even further proves my point that I'm a selfish asshole sinner. But it's so validating that science matches up with low anthropology. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's so just like, yes, like this is who people are, and we want to think, this other way about ourselves. And people, when they hear this, they're always like, I know you're kidding, RJ, but people are always like, oh my God, she's so negative and da-da-da. It's like, no, this is where you find your freedom. Like when you don't constantly wake up every day.
What it looks like to live in the light.
Yes, 100%. It's the truth in the light. To not wake up every day and think, how do I like project, being a more moral person? How does everyone know that I'm making these good choices? Like when you're just like, I'm for sure going to screw up today. And I'm beloved, in the midst of that, it makes you see the world with the eyes of love in a way that you otherwise you're constantly frustrated with people and you're constantly disappointed in yourself.
Totally.
I mean,
having a high view of yourself leads to denial and judgment, self-righteousness, despair. Yeah, all sorts of hiding, all sorts of lack of intimacy, lack of honesty. Because intimacy happens when we reveal our true selves. But coming to terms with the fact that you're not good allows you to have compassion on yourself, on other people, to tell the truth, to not hide, to find grace, mercy, forgiveness. I think about this as the difference between Brad Bird and Pete Docter. Both of whom I love. They both direct animated movies. Brad Bird wrote and directed The Iron Giant, Ratatouille, and The Incredibles, all of which are stories about finding your true self and being true to your true self, which are great movies, but ultimately ring kind of false, and not terribly hopeful. Whereas Pete Docter directed Inside Out and Up and Soul most recently, all of which are not about that life isn't about discovering who you really are. Life is actually about your feelings and who you love and who loves you.
Yes.
And actually living life for what it is rather than hoping and wishing that it were something else and that you were someone else. And Pete Docter's a Christian. I said before, my wife used to babysit his kids in Berkeley, and I would love to. He actually just did an interview with Terry Gross that I haven't listened to yet, which I have to listen to.
It's so good. I just
is it good?
It. Yeah,
is he a good? Is he a good speaker? Some of his artists are not.
It made me want to watch Soul, which I've been hesitant about. So
it's really good.
Yeah, it's so it's the dichotomy. Those are two very clear. Like you said, is life about discovering your true inner good self and finding freedom there, or is it actually letting go of that and living life for what it is, living in light of the reality of life, and sort of loving what's in front of you and learning to love your life as it is rather than trying to make it to a place that you think you'll be able to love it or love yourself.
Can I just say, I would never wish what has happened to me upon anybody. But my God, has it been clarifying for what matters?
Yes.
I mean, you really do start to look at your life. Like, I'm 38, and I start to look at it in terms of decades. My parents are in their 60s. That's less than 3 decades from now, really, for me. And, like, I mean, maybe this will come as a surprise to some people, but, like, how, like, there's a trajectory in, like, secular jobs, and you want to, like, get to the top of the pyramid so you can, like, be real shiny and everybody can look up to you on the top of the pyramid and be like, wow, she's shiny. Well, that's true in the church, too. And, I mean, there's always this, like, bigger, better stuff, even in the church. Because the church is run by people, and people are selfish sinners. But anyway, I that's just gone for me. Because I know now, in a very clarified way, it's exactly what you're saying, RJ. The people in front of you, like the people that have been given into your care, the people you feel compassion and love for. And maybe those are people in your house. Maybe God is calling you, like this coach beyond that. Maybe your vision of family gets expanded. Mine certainly has in the wake of loss. But it has been such a terrible and beautiful gift to get out of this.
Well, there was a New Yorker cartoon this week that kind of hurt. It was the young woman saying, "I can't wait to forget everything I learned about myself during quarantine." And one of the things that quarantine has taught many of us is the extent to which, or at least I feel like it's revealed things to me about myself that I really had been trying to outrun, or it's made you think about stuff from, for me, it's usually stuff from the past, or confronting realities of, just the town you live in, or whatever it is that you kind of didn't want to, you were using the treadmill to avoid. And even for those who haven't lost someone, we've all sort of, I think, Sarah, you said it like way back when, you said we're all sort of grieving in a way. And part of that is to realize what really matters in life, which is, I think, love and connection. I thought it was interesting too how the article says in many places that the belief in the true self actually gives people justification for doing bad things, because
totally.
They'll be like, well, that's not who I really am underneath. If these circumstances were different, and if I was growing in the right direction, I would, you would know that I'm actually a really good person deep down. It's like, yeah, but you just, that doesn't look like it, Well,
a corollary of that, the people in our culture with the highest self-esteem, I've said this before, the people with the highest self-esteem, sociopaths.
Yeah.
Because they just don't care. It's kind of it's related.
That's that's so fascinating. Yeah.
But in a sense, what it also is saying is that there is a push and pull within people. There is a Romans 7 actual reality to folks where they kind of know that the belief in the true self in a lot of ways sounds like they know they should be better, but aren't really. And so you're constantly trying to get there and avoiding the true self. This belief is one way of, again, as you guys said, it's avoiding who you really are. And it's, I think about it again in terms of this last chance you, and I think of it as to these young men who've been told nothing, that they're villains like their whole lives, and they've been shut down, and there's all sorts of, really systemic things against them. This man shows he doesn't come in with saying, you guys are the best guys ever. In fact, he comes in sort of saying, I care about you so much that I'm going to be here and I'm going to push you harder, and I'm going to and I'm just going to show you grace and see what happens.
Yeah.
And that does create a sort of a new, but it's all outward focused. It's not, the guys aren't thinking about themselves. What happens is they think about their teammates, and they start thinking about other people, and it's the left hand not knowing what the right is doing. And all of a sudden there's some transformations have happened. Some people seem to actually have become a slightly different version of themselves, and some would say a better version, and yet it hasn't come by appealing to their sort of inner goodness. It's really been by drawing them away from who they are and into community and through, of course, the actions of an outside gracious person that they know loves them. And I just find it, the whole thing, I'm so inspired by it. Any other final words? Yeah.
Yeah, I actually wrote what you said, like to show you grace and to see what happens, I think is maybe the closest we get to any sense of becoming more like Jesus in incarnational theology. To show people grace and to see what happens.
Sarah, the only other thing, what you said reminded me of an article I saw this week, actually on today.com, which I'm assuming is the website of the television show. But someone wrote a book recently where they interviewed a bunch of hospice nurses, people who spend a lot of time with dying people about what their biggest regrets in life. And the 3 regrets are... this one I can kind of take.
Lost love.
I didn't live the life of my dreams, which I kind of get, but I also feel like as a Christian, I don't know. But the 2 which really got me were I didn't share my love. I didn't love others enough. And the last one was I didn't forgive. So I basically I didn't live enough. I didn't love enough. I didn't forgive enough. Which kind of goes to what you're saying when you've had a sort of an experience of death. Maybe you I don't know, you love more. You forgive more, and hopefully you're free to live more. And live the life of my dreams is a little bit American-y language, but I think what that means is just sort of do what makes me happy, like do what I want to do, what gives me joy, rather than think, intimacy, not efficiency. Let's put it that way. Relationship, not accomplishment. So I thought that was interesting. Does that resonate with you at all, Sarah?
Yeah, it does. And I would say, I do think we read that live the life of my dreams thing, and we especially as Christians, are like, but, I honestly, I'm sorry, this is like my constant example for everything right now, you guys, but like, my mom never got to see England. She wanted to see England her whole life. That was all she ever wanted. Like, there are these things, right, that like and she could have, honestly, like, they could have done that, but they didn't. And like, so I don't know. It's funny, we have this terrible joke, but like, my mom has hated their fireplace since Josh and I got married, which was 15 years ago, and she just had it redone, like a month before she died. And it's like, people hear, before this happened, I would hear that stuff and be like, oh, rich people, you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't, and now I'm like, just redo your fire, like, you know what I mean? Like, if that is like gonna bring you joy, like, by God, redo your fireplace, go to Canterbury. You know what I mean? Like, live your life. So
that's fascinating.
Use paper plates.
Gosh.
I don't give a damn.
I also think, I agree with you, Sarah, and at the same time, I do think we're going to get to heaven, and the fireplaces are going to be amazing. The paper plates will be never ending. They'll recycle themselves.
I love it.
The castles will be.
They'll turn into whales.
All the things all the regrets we might have as we're slipping into the kingdom of, we're going to wake up and be like, I will never regret anything ever again, because life has just been utterly transformed, and every dream will be. I certainly hope every dream will be fulfilled.
I wrote something about regret recently because it's just I think it's a really fascinating subject, and it plays into this a little bit. One of the reasons our culture hates regret and sort of says, don't regret anything, just own your mistakes.
Frank Sinatra.
And move on. You have no regrets.
We affirm it all.
But regret, actually, what it does is it ties you to your past self and says you're not actually that different than you used to be. And what is funny about that is that if you can accept the fact that everyone has regrets, and including you, and that, then what all of a sudden you have is understanding and compassion for other people. It not only ties you to yourself, it gives you a point of connection and weakness, but therefore love with others. And again, this is how low anthropology that we keep saying, it feeds into an actual compassion and outward focus. And the reality of regret is painful. It doesn't mean it feels good, but it also means that the fact that everyone regrets stuff means that we're not our true selves. And how do we can either see that as an opportunity to love other people who are not their true selves and maybe go a little lighter on them, or we can just despair that who could love us like this. One of the great lines in this show is that they talk about one of the shooting guard on the team named Sean, and the two of the coaches they're like yeah, he's an asshole, but he's the most lovable asshole I've ever met. And I was like, I hope someone says that about me one day.
We do, Dave. We do.
It does.
Yeah.
We do. Oh, thank you.
We actually have just a text thread, and that's what it's called.
We do. Yes.
Dave is a lovable asshole.
Well, you were talking about
the secret's out.
RJ, you talked about how people regretting not forgiving other people, and this leads into the next article that was in the Atlantic, written by Graham Wood. He's an Asian writer who is sort of very interested in what happened at Teen Vogue, which I didn't know that they had a young lady.
I read all about this yesterday, so I came prepared unexpectedly.
Okay, so there was a young African-American woman who was going to be the new editor of Teen Vogue, and it was all set to happen. And she's like 29 or something. And some old tweets resurfaced where she was complaining about Asian folks in her orbit. And there's some ugly things she said on Twitter. And the response has been to, she's lost that opportunity and she's been fired. And all this
canceled.
Yes, in contemporary parlance, she's been actually canceled, not just reprimanded. She's lost her job, and this
at 29.
At 29. Now this,
just to be clear,
this man,
this will be Googleable for the rest of this woman's life.
Yes, and they, we're dealing with the moment right now as people are talking about racism towards Asians and and the fallout of that, and it's a very hot.
I mean, there's been so much violence. It's terrifying.
It's a hot topic, and so this is what he says. He says, I suppose a magazine aimed at teens and preteens would strain to acknowledge what every adult knows, which is that the entire point of being a teenager is to make and correct the most mortifying errors of your life. Then, at some vague point when the first digit of your age is no longer a 1, you experience a cleansing bonfire of your sins, and your adult permanent record begins. I don't know about that. If Teen Vogue does not exist to celebrate this period of still expungible error, then it may as well be calling for the abolition of the teenage years altogether. Its staff, as well as many of its advertisers, evidently think its readers deserve no bonfire, no sin jubilee, and should be hounded eternally for their dumbest and most bigoted utterances. The coup at Teen Vogue is the result of a debased form of identity building, one that mistakes an identity worth having for one founded on the pitiless prosecution of offenses by members of other races, regardless of whether they are large or small, intended or unintended, ongoing or long disavowed. Like everyone, Asian Americans should meet racism and violence with the contempt they deserve. But they should decline to model their outrage on the vindictive excesses that have become commonplace. The strongest argument for McCammon's ouster is that she has not been especially gracious in accepting the apologies of others. But let's grant her maximum charity. In a world in which McCammon, that's the young woman who's lost her job, in a world in which McCammon apologizes for her old tweets is better than one in which she sees nothing wrong with them. Possibly worse than the latter, though, is one in which the highest aspiration of racial pride is to slam the doors of repentance permanently in the faces of your enemies. In many religious traditions, expiation of guilt is an earthly process. You can confess your sins to a priest or wander earth in sackcloth and ashes. For the sake of today's Teen Vogue readers, I hope that by the time they are McCammon's age, the current culture has developed its own process of expiation. Most people were 17 once, and those who haven't gotten there yet will be 17 someday, and 27 too.
She wrote these when she was a teenager. Is that correct? Like what she wrote?
It sounds like that. I don't know. I don't have the facts in front of me.
That was what was. I mean, that was my understanding yesterday. Again, we could be wrong, and I'm certain we will get letters telling us that we were. But that I'm so glad that he's saying this, because that was what I kept thinking, was like, wow, what is this saying to, what does this mean for being a teenager? I mean, what does this mean for, and, I mean, as a parent of someone who is like transitioning towards adolescence, headed towards being a teenager, it's terrifying. And it makes me like never want to let either of my children near a computer. But I also think, okay, well, they have the privilege of a parent, right, at a certain moment that is aware of this, that's saying you can't do this. And for those people who are coming along, I mean, I do think about this. When I was a kid, my parents were super techie. We had like 8 computers in the house when I was a kid. And so I had like one of the first, do you guys remember, was it AIM?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
AIM.
Yeah.
Taking me back.
So I was in like 6th grade, right? And I had my first like chat, whatever thing. And my parents were like, yeah, have at it. Like no one was there to like monitor. Like it was just like, this sounds cool. This is what the future looks like. And so I was like, I got to pick a name. And I was doing like a ton of Shakespeare, and because I was a theater nerd kid. And so part of the name was Nymph. Okay.
Is that a fact?
Didn't know. Yeah. And I didn't know. And like immediately, like my account got banned, like it was like all this, nothing even like remotely bad happened to me. Thank God. Because immediately like the powers that be at, AOL Instant Messenger or whatever were like, this is not good. But yeah, I mean, I think about like also the privilege, right, of having parents that safeguard you through this stuff. Not every kid has that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's also an interesting conversation here to me, is like, if you don't have a parent that sits you down, and also like, okay, so let's talk about why she felt like she could say this stuff about a whole different ethnicity. Perhaps she was raised in a household where people spoke that way. So because of her upbringing, and because of like the fact that she had not been raised in a household that taught her about racism, suddenly like she will forever like be unhireable. I mean, like seriously, like these are bigger questions than just like this person was racist in this moment. It's like, when you want to talk about like, family systems. I mean, like, I don't know. I think it's really, I mean, we can certainly do this thing where we're like cancel culture and all that stuff, but like, it's like, it makes me think about what household did she grow up in? What was this little girl like when she was 8 years old? I mean, one thing I think about a lot, and honestly, it relates to Last Chance, is like, and there's something about this for me as a campus minister that has been such a blessing, is like, I'm more able to see people and think about what they were like when they were 8. Like, and I think whenever we see people that we just like have decided we already hate them, and trust me, I mean, that's on my list of hobbies on my CV. It's like, but these people were children once, and I don't know. I'm rambling. RJ, what do you think?
Their true selves when they were 8 years old. I have an 8-year-old at home, and let me just say, moral goodness is only part of the equation. Yeah.
Oh, a small part.
I have a little bit different take, honestly. Like, Kevin Hart is back. Martha Stewart is back. Louis C.K. isn't back yet, but I bet he will be. It does strike me that even these people.
Every time I see him, I gag a little bit. I bet maybe.
Yeah, Dave Chappelle is so funny about.
I mean, I do want to point out, of all those people, you've named one woman, and she had a lot of money and a whole empire.
Yeah, I did think about that. Is this a double standard? Is there like
it's 100% a double standard? Yes, it is 100%.
I mean, can you think of other women who got canceled for doing something illegal or immoral or whatever, and now are back? Can you think of it? Who sort of rehabilitate their public image beyond Martha Stewart? I'm thinking.
The only person that comes to mind is Monica Lewinsky. But her comeback has still been so based in
Britney Spears?
Britney, dude, are you not up on the news? No, she is not well. Free Britney Spears.
No, she's not well, but I'm saying
Hashtag
she's
free
back
Britney
though.
Spears.
She's thought of generally positively as opposed to negatively. Like, she went through a time where like she's a bad mom.
But she didn't like
mentally fit.
I just don't know that you get like racism Twitter canceled and you come back from that, especially as a woman. And also, this is a woman of color. Like, I don't know. I just think the standards are higher.
I'm just saying I've been struck recently, and it may be, as Sarah, you're pointing out, that we're quicker to forgive men than we are women. Like, let's be straight up. But I am surprised. It just comes to mind. I was like, oh, wait. Oh, yeah, he went through this thing, or she went through this thing 5-10 years ago, and now they're back, and no one, you seem to have forgotten, which I think is kind of a good thing in a way. Like, people should be able to make mistakes and not have it completely ruin the rest of their lives.
But I would say the difference is this woman hasn't even really
started
the
living
time to create anything, right? Like part of the reason we welcome Martha Stewart back or Kevin Hart back is because they had created things that we loved already.
Yeah.
And she hasn't even had that time. And I think, I follow Monica Lewinsky on Twitter. She's fascinating. I think a lot about, one thing my parents said to me very recently was, we should have handled that better in front of you than we did.
Yes.
Like, we were very judgmental of her. We really like the Clintons, and that kind of stuff. And she was a young woman, and she was in a vulnerable situation, and, she was really the victim in this.
Yes.
And, I think when I think about this woman at Teen Vogue, it's like her life is over before it started, in such a similar way in a lot of ways. So not that she's the victim, like, please don't send me that email. Like, I just,
No,
my husband is nicer than I am. I don't know what I need to say here, but like, it's just
it's interesting that they say that like people were less inclined to let it slide because she had been kind of vicious to people who had transgressed these norms, and that's something to bear in mind as we go through life. And
that's like what happened in Gimlet with the Reply All podcast. Did you guys hear about that? They're doing a whole series about what happened at Bon Appetit magazine and kind of racism and bullying, and then it turned out that the two people who were doing the show were kind of accused of the same thing. So that's one of my favorite shows. I was bummed that
what did they say?
Anyway.
Policing people's ideological purity is a parlor game in which everyone leaves the room.
Everyone dies. Yeah. Everyone gets killed.
So, but the plea for grace, though. I mean, I maybe she's in a. Maybe she will. Maybe, who knows, Sarah? Maybe we can pray for her that some sort of opportunity opens up. And I thought it would close by. I wrote a piece this week that has some similar dynamics to it about the doctrine of grace versus the disposition of grace. And I think it has all of this stuff we've been talking about. I was trying to deal. It was the occasion for it was David French, the political columnist, had written about this Beth Moore, who Sarah has written about. She has decided to leave the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, I didn't actually know she was part of the Southern Baptist Convention, but he said it didn't seem like there'd been a theological divergence. She'd had some change of mind, so much as she'd been subjected to so much cruelty from people within her denomination, and just basically didn't want to associate herself with that, as well as sort of some historical sins that she felt had not been adequately addressed. But it was mainly her opposition to the previous administration. But I took it as he basically said that there's a distinction between among people who actually have similar convictions. There's a difference in disposition, meaning are they nice or are they mean about how they communicate these things? Because French himself has been accused of being too nice. Because he's sort of a right-leaning person that a lot of left-leaning people read. This is something my brother had said to me that really struck me. He said, the way you hold a position is oftentimes just as important as the position you hold. That's what he has sort of learned from 20 years in public ministry. And his words reminded me of a hot July day 10 years ago, sitting in standstill traffic outside New York City and watching in amazement as a church van a few lanes over decided to redeem the time by getting out a megaphone and reciting scripture to the rest of us. There were no sudden conversions or hallelujahs. People were annoyed, and since it was New York, they kind of made their feelings known. But the lesson I took from it was that you cannot communicate the gospel confrontationally. You cannot convey a message about grace in a non-gracious or overbearing way. Just like you cannot talk about justice in an unjust manner. The circuits simply don't match up. I think this is not dissimilar to what Marilyn Robinson said when she quipped that nothing true can be said about God from a posture of defense. But then French wisely says that, lest we think this is a problem in the Southern Baptist Convention, we're Episcopalians, or sort of on the
Pivot.
far end, and there's a lot of cruelty in that, in our situation as too. He said, no single church faction or ideological side has a monopoly on cruelty. The spirit of the age declares that if you get the, quote, big things correct, then cruelty and self-righteousness in the pursuit of those goals are either minor flaws, like bad manners, or outright virtues. After all, didn't Jesus drive the money changers from the temple with a whip? It's as if kindness to your opponents is somehow seen as evidence of insufficient devotion to your righteous cause. Now, this is me writing. To those who would claim it is cowardly or convenient to err on the side of grace in public discourse, just try it. It is so much harder to pull off an ironic attitude for any period of time than it is to succumb to gut instinct, blame, and scorn, especially since the internet so clearly rewards and incentivizes that.
Oh, it's crazy.
While disposition may not be the whole loaf, it explains a lot more, as I get older at least, than ideology on its own. I was talking to some college students recently, and they were complaining about a group of peers who had taken upon themselves to report anyone violating the university's protocols about gathering. As they described the, quote, narcs in question, I couldn't help...
That was me in college.
I couldn't help but chuckle. When I was in college, conservatives were the ones perceived as being anti-fun. The group they described was composed almost exclusively of progressives. The motivating convictions were different, but the finger-wagging, power-happy disposition was the same. And that disposition, I think, has a way of attaching itself to authority, whatever ideological underpinning. Steer clear, I urge them, as it seldom ends well. On the flip side, stick close to those who exude a gracious disposition, both in life and in church, even if their professed theology or politics seem lacking. When it comes to houses of worship, the beliefs a church espouses on their website are only one part of discerning whether to attend. Disposition is a separate and, in my opinion, a highly underrated factor. So all this is to say that my brother John is right, at least about this. The way you hold a position is very often as important as the position you hold, but it's especially important when that position begins with the acknowledgement that all of us have significant blind spots and that no one ever changes their mind by sheer accusation. Antagonism antagonizes. And yet, as French writes, human beings need forgiveness and kindness like we need oxygen. Of course, the position John had in mind also entails that no one will communicate it 100% correctly or kindly, and that the Spirit can use pretty much any means it desires. As long as we're placing our hope in the Christian's ability to be kind, rather than the Christ's sacrificial kindness toward those who deserve anything but, we're lost. There is a stark mismatch between our near infinite ability to talk about kindness, or whatever moral value we cherish at the moment, and our ability to actually embody it. But the starting point for human charity, come to find out, isn't being sufficiently lectured about it, but the receipt of charity when you're least disposed to expect it, which is a long-winded way of saying I'm grateful that God's grace is more than a position and more than a posture. It's a person.
It's so funny that, so John said something to me several years ago when we were at Sewanee one summer together, your brother, that was so similar. I was, complaining about how everyone's a worse preacher than I am.
They are.
Because I am I'm an insufferable sinner, if I haven't made that clear already in this episode. And John said something so compassionate about bad preaching. He said, the tone is more important than the content. Do they mean well? Do they love their people? And I think about that all the time, especially when I'm critiquing other people's preaching. Especially, it's a gracious word I give to myself when I feel like my sermons are not up to par. And certainly some, with that in mind, I will say some of the worst preaching actually is preaching where it does not feel like they love their people. You know what I mean? It does not feel like they mean well. It feels like they are doing exactly sort of what you're saying doesn't work, which is condemning them and accusing them.
Or trying to change them.
Telling them to get... You're trying to change them. Yeah. And so it's funny. It's sort of the same thing, right? But said in a different context. That was very helpful. Yeah, I mean, I think this is like the kind of thing that's like why Mockingbird is so important in my life, because this is the stuff that this is like one of our regular things, right? That we talk about, that we know. It's also a regular thing that we know we see over and over again in psychological work. You know this in parenting. Like you can't get a kid to do something, or you certainly can't get them to do something and love you while they're doing it if you have like a condemning spirit about them. So, I have to be reminded of this over and over again, because the default is always, tell people to get their lives together, right? Tell them to sort of follow your moral code. And why is that easier? And I think that's, this episode is speaking to itself. It's easier because to do the other thing, to offer them grace, to do, what was it Dave said earlier I wrote down? To show people grace and to see what happens requires intimacy. Requires us to like really be present.
Faith.
And
that maybe there's a God who can do something. Yeah.
Right. So.
Coach Mosley says that rules without relationship equals rebellion.
Ooh,
that's
totally true.
And what I think he means is rules without love equals just reactance.
Yeah.
He says it better.
Well, Sarah, you talking about the what John said about tone mattering more than content. It's really good, and it reminds me of something that I think Jacob Smith said when he was talking about preaching the gospel, and this was a while ago, that you always need to be careful that you're preaching for something and not against something. That if you constantly find yourself preaching against something, you may not connect with your people. You may be attacking a straw man. But are you talking more about what you're for rather than what you're against? And clearly there are moments for confrontation. Like, Paul doesn't pull punches in Galatians and parts of Corinthians. And there's some times when things need to be called out. Although, interestingly, mostly he's calling out people's sort of self-justification and self-righteousness. So there is times for that. But I think, by and large, the goal should be, can you talk about grace in a gracious way? In a way that doesn't feel like you're trying to start a fight. You're not trying to be against somebody. That someone is free to disagree with you. They can kind of take it or leave it. Jesus was not terribly coercive. Let him who has ears to hear, hear. And can you have the faith, the kindness to sort of just put it out there and let it be. We have this little Wednesday noonday prayer and women's Bible study here at church. And yesterday was the story of the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fire with King Nebuchadnezzar. And he says, "Worship this God, or I'll put you in the fire." And they're basically saying, "Well, okay. And I guess if our God is real, He'll save us. But we're not worshiping your God." They're not confrontational. There's we're not doing that. And and God shows up. And so I think. What does Peter say? Be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have, but do it with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience.
RJ, you're so Baptist. I just love all this scripture.
Well, we got so many Episcopalians. I just need.
And when you throw it out, I'm just like, wait, that's.
I said the same thing. It's I can't.
What page?
Relief. I'm so relieved that that's in there. That I do quote in that same piece a story about John Wimber, the guy who started the Vineyard movement, and he did come across a man who had one of the signs on him, but it wasn't like "Repent, the kingdom of heaven is near." It was a sign that said, "I am a fool for Christ. Whose fool are you?" And that it doesn't mean that you can't put the message out there. That's not what this is saying, or that being gracious tonally means being like somehow super soft or I don't know, like marshmallowy. It just means that you actually, it's coming from a place of caring about other people as they are, rather than hating other people because you hate yourself, or that sort of vindictiveness that does come across. And I think that disposition thing is just it's the reason why I think some people's preaching really does hit home, even though you go back, it's like, I don't really remember what they said, but I just remember I felt like they believed it, and I felt like it was some message about God. And I feel a little bit closer. And again, it doesn't mean that the content is. One of the things I say in there is I think that it's a measure of how important grace is. That it's also the spirit of it is important in the delivery.
The medium matched the message.
But I know I tried at the end of the article to say that, like, this doesn't mean that God can't work through someone who is just. Sometimes we have someone who's totally doesn't mean well, and God uses that too. So, like, I hope that's true for me, because some
like every interaction anyone ever has with me, they're like, "Whoa, she does not mean well, but somehow God used her."
Well, sometimes you get up there in the pulpit and you're like, I'm trying to get this over with. I really don't care how it's received. I'm like, I'm exhausted, and I just want to.
I've got the Rona.
I want to eat some pizza.
Right.
Any closing thoughts for us as we hit, because that's what we're about to hit, Holy Week, as we said, and Good Friday is the sense that, no one ultimately came to the table in the end, and that the world really did turn its back on the one who was so incredibly gracious toward sinners.
I'll say one thing. I've been, as we've gone virtual, all of our bulletins are online, and I always like to have a little cover image, that fits the week. And I've got to read up more about him. But there's this French, late 19th century French painter named James Tissot, who did like 400 paintings of the life of Jesus.
He's amazing.
Yeah. And he has about 6 different ones of the crucifixion. But the one I'm putting on the Good Friday bulletin, which I've never seen anything like, and it really takes your breath away, it's a painting from the perspective of Jesus, looking down on, and Mary is there, and John is there, and the high priests are there, and the centurion is there, and the only part of Jesus you see are his bloody nailed feet right at the bottom. And it's uncomfortable because you don't want to put yourself in Jesus's place. But it's also so affecting because it's like it shows you the people that are putting him to death, or at the least not doing anything about it, and communicates that these are the people he's dying for. He's dying for the people who are looking at him and not doing anything about it. And so if you have a chance to look, and all these are at the Brooklyn Museum.
I'll put a link in the show notes. I've got prints of all these, RJ.
Do you have the book? Do you have that amazing book?
No, I have the original published New Testament.
No, like the one that's like $1,000.
Yeah,
I really want that.
My dad gave it to me as like someone gave it to him as a present.
Yeah. I want a copy of that, so that you can.
Well, I'm going through my parents' books. I'll let you know.
Please,
if that
and
shows
I'll
up
take
in the midst
it.
of all the
Cotton.
But it's
Southern.
It's worth. He's worth a look, and that painting is worth. It's called "The View from the Cross."
That's amazing.
The View from the Cross.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, that's somebody's sermon, RJ. So
Give
that's
me my
a gift.
sermon. So I think.
Good.
Who knows? I'll tell you Friday morning.
Spoiler. Well, I hope you all have a great Triduum, and mainly just Happy Easter
So Roman.
to all of our listeners.
I'm always like, how you say
Me
that?
too. I was like,
Okay.
Triduum? Triduum? I don't know. Triduum? Okay.
Don't never say that again,
Tricycle.
RJ.
I won't.
Okay.
No, but happy
right.
Easter to you, the two of you,
Too soon.
and to our listeners. We can't wait to see you, we can't wait to be back again soon.
Absolutely.
I hope you have a really
Yeah.
a blessed time. Seriously.
Love you guys.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.
Praise the Lord. Praise